I met Paul and said, do you want to join my band, you know? And then George joined. And then Ringo joined. We were just a band who made it very, very big, that's all.
Hello there, my name's Scott, and welcome to Dig a Podcast, a show in which I give you an in-depth story behind the songs sung by the best band there is, was, and ever will be, the Beatles. In this season, Season 2, we work our way through the album Meet the Beatles, or our UK listeners know it as With the Beatles. Meet the Beatles is the second Beatles album released in the United States. It was the first US Beatles album to be issued by Capitol Records on 20th of January 1964 in both mono and stereo formats. It topped the popular album chart on the 15th of February 1964 and remained at number 1 for 11 weeks before being replaced by the Beatles' second album. The cover featured Robert Freeman's iconic portrait of the Beatles used in the UK for the With the Beatles, with a blue tint added to the original stark black and white photograph. Let's continue our journey with track 3.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This Boy. The Beatles' versatility is something that may not have been noticed by screaming teenage girls of the early days of Beatlemania, but it was a key ingredient to their enduring career. While most of their British contemporaries, such as the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and the Dave Clark Five, could thrash out their own band of rock and roll very convincingly, they appeared somewhat awkward when trying to reveal a softer side. Their attempts at this were most likely an imitation of what the Beatles were doing anyway. Would A Tears Go By the Rolling Stones, Tired of Waiting for You by the Kinks, or Because by the Dave Clark Five ever existed if there weren't for the Beatles setting the blueprint ahead of time? The Stones emphatically answered this question with their Beatles copycat career throughout the most of the 60s. And who could blame them? Truth be known, the Beatles were setting the benchmark for other acts to follow, even though it may have been unbeknownst to them. The Beatles were simply versatile. They could rock and roll themselves right off the stage, but that was only a portion of their intention. They naturally had a love for many different styles of music, including the softer side. Lennon himself stated that the Beatles never stuck to one style. They never just did blues or just rock. We loved all music. Even the sentimental things, as John called them. Their early cabin years reflected this, showing them crooning adult-sounding classics like Till You and Falling in Love Again, right in between Twist and Shout and Sweet Little 16. What was so incredible was how convincingly they delivered such a vast array of musical styles on stage. The softer side of their musical tastes come from their love of many different genres, such as in the case of This Boy, which combines their love of the doo-wop sound of the 50s with the incredible influence that Smokey Robinson and the Miracles had on John Lennon. Once again, as fame brought them to America, we see how natural and convincing the Beatles were at portraying their softer side. They weren't simply throwing in a mellow song just to relieve the rocking tension of the album, or in order to appease their manager on the record label, but because it was another ingredient of the whole. It was part of them, and that continued to be heard throughout their career. The songwriting maturity displayed on This Boy could hardly have gone unnoticed by the curious adult onlookers of the group's second appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show on February 16th, 1964. While their first appearance on the show, February 9th, brought forward the excellent Till There Was You. The evidence was clear by the second week that the Beatles were much more than just head-swinging, long-haired noisemakers. While detractors abounded, honest-minded parents had to admit there was unmistakable talent behind the gimmicks. And while the daughters came home with the Meet the Beatles album in early 1964, the third track on the side 1 reinforced that fact. Evidence of the sophistication of the song's melody was revealed by the Beatles producer George Martin, who chose to record and release an instrumental version of the song under the title Ringo's Theme, This Boy, used as a backdrop to the scene of a sullen Ringo Starr wandering around the waterfront in the movie A Hard Day's Night. It was issued as a single in the US and even made the Billboard single charts, number 53. This added to the credibility of the Lennon-McCartney songwriting team, proving that an enduring melodic chord structure and melody line could stand alone and win the hearts of adult audiences as well as teenagers. Upon recollecting his personal songwriting abilities during the Beatles' years, Lennon recalls This Boy and states, "I was writing melody with the best of them. On that we can all agree." Songwriting history. Just my attempt at writing one of those 3-part harmony Smokey Robinson songs, Lennon explains about This Boy. With this statement, one can assume that the song has been written entirely by John. He also states as such in a 1972 Hit Parader magazine interview. However, Paul gives a vivid and convincing recollection otherwise. He describes the song as another hotel bedroom song written when they had a couple of hours to kill, before getting ready for another performance sometime in September 1963. Although we don't know the exact day, in this case we know the exact time the song was written, as McCartney recalls arriving around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which would take them to around 3 o'clock when the song was considered complete. As a footnote concerning whether the song was completely written in this 2-hour writing session in September, we need to consider the actual session takes of the song in the recording studio the following month. At some point during the recording sessions for this song, the guitar solo was featured instead of the vocals in the bridge, which could suggest that the lyrics in the bridge were written during the recording sessions. Although this is possible, it seems unlikely because of the intricacies of the melody line and the lyrics we've come to know. It is also unlikely they were written during the recording sessions because of the approximate hour's time that they were used to completely record the song on that day. This being the case, it can be accurately assumed that This Boy was indeed written completely in the hotel bedroom in 2 hours. McCartney's account of this September writing session is uncharacteristically vivid. Remembering the position of the beds, John and I sitting on twin beds, the G-plan furniture, the British hotel with olive green and orange everywhere, the marvellous combination, the colours of vomit. In that setting, they fulfilled the desire to write a close harmony song patterned after the 3-part harmony they used in the Phil Spector written To Know Her Is to Love Her during the Cavern Club days. According to Harrison, Lennon patterned the song after the Smokey Robinson and the Miracles song I've Been Good to You, which has a similar chord pattern, melody and arrangement. McCartney describes This Boy as quite a departure for them, saying they never actually tried to write something with 3-part harmonies before. On that day, they naturally worked out a 2-part harmony for the song first, and then afterward worked on a 3rd harmony for George to sing. McCartney at one point had claimed that his father had taught the Beatles how to do 3-part harmony, but Harrison protests the claim. After describing This Boy as one of their 3-part harmony numbers, he explained, "When you think back to early rock and roll, there was always stuff like Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, the Everly Brothers, the Platters. Everybody had harmonies. It was natural to sing a harmony sometimes, That natural ability was, of course, refined by producer George Martin in the studio. They always experimented with close harmony singing, Martin recalls. All I did was change the odd note. This was done in the studio, with all three vocalists sitting with Martin at the piano while he made small but necessary adjustments in the notes they sang. Meanwhile, Ringo sat at the back of the studio smoking a cigarette and reading a comic book. William Mann, the music critic for the London Times, mentioned this boy in a flattering but ostentatious review of the Beatles' music in late 1963. McCartney, referring to his article, mentioned Mann's reference to the pandiatonic clusters that came flying out of us at the end of this boy. We hadn't been conscious of any of that. Lennon and McCartney may have lacked the proper musical training, but they must have paid more than the usual attention when listening and studying to the music they were exposed to. Recording history. Both sides of their fifth British single were recorded during the same 3 hours recording session on October 17th, 1963 at EMI Studio 2 in London. This was the same historic recording session that introduced the techniques of 4-track recording to the Beatles, having recorded I Want to Hold Your Hand in the same manner of that day, as well as the first Beatles Christmas record of Speech and an aborted attempt at the remake of You Really Got a Hold on Me. Having done these other 3 items first, This Boy was last on the agenda for the day, with approximately comprised the final hour of the session, 9 to 10 p.m. It took 15 takes of the song, most of them complete to perfect, although there was more to be done to get it to the complete state as we know it. The vocals were recorded by the Beatles' request, with all 3 vocalists huddled around one microphone. The finished version appears to be an edit of takes 14 and 15, which is brutally spliced together just before the final verse, making an obvious abrupt edit that was very noticeable in the finished product, although performed with flow and precision when done on stage, as can be seen on their Ed Sullivan Show appearance. 2 overdubs, takes 16 and 17, were then recorded, which comprised George Harrison performing octave guitar fills at the end of the song. These overdubs were added to the end of take 15. One more session was needed to get the song into a releasable condition. A mixing session, attended by George Martin and engineer Norman Smith only, was held 4 days later on October 21st. This day was arranged to create the mono mixes necessary for releasing their 5th British single. They created 2 mono mixes from take 15 of the recording session and then performed an edit of both of those mixes to get the final version, creating the fade out that was heard on the released recording. It was decided at this stage, for an unknown reason, to fade the end of the song instead of the full ending the Beatles recorded in the studio. Needless to say, the Beatles continued to perform the full ending on stage throughout the song's performance life. No stereo mix of the song was recorded at this time, since the song was only slated as a single in Britain. However, entirely by accident, the song was given its first studio mix on November 10th, 1966. A telephone call was made to Abbey Road to inform EMI of the lineup of the first Greatest Hits package, which was scheduled to be released in December of that year. By mistake, the phone message related that This Boy would be on the album, so it would need to have a stereo mix made for the album release. The message should have indicated the song Bad Boy, which was not released in Britain at that time and would be included on the album, which was entitled A Collection of Beatles Oldies, as an enticement for the fans to buy an album of songs that probably already owned. Before the mistake was corrected, the 4-track tape of This Boy was dug out and treated to its first and only stereo mix. 2 stereo mixes were made from the edited take 15 of the song, and then both of those mixes were edited together to create a full stereo mix. Subsequently, the mix used for the stereo version of Meet the Beatles in the US was actually a duophonic or fake stereo mix created by Capitol Records. This fake stereo mix continued to be used in America well after 1966, because the true stereo mix that was made then didn't surface until October of 1988 with the release of Past Masters Volume 1. This Boy did revisit EMI Studios on one other occasion. That occasion was June 3rd, 1964, when the Beatles were auditioning Jimmy Nicol to replace an ailing Ringo Starr from the beginning of their world tour. It would be necessary to see if Jimmy could handle the subdued drum arrangement Ringo had played on this song, as well as rock out on I Saw Her Standing There and Long Tall Sally. Apparently he could. Just 27 hours later, they were in Copenhagen on their first date of their tour. Thanks for listening to Dig a Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. This has been a Team Wilco production. Until next time, if you know what I mean. Do I did? No? Okay.